unsure if Bill Miner and his gang. We must first highlight a remarkable woman from Kamloops. Through her lens, she captured some of the most famous photos of the robber in the following trial. But it was not pure luck that had Mary Spencer taking these photos. She was known as a keen businesswoman with an incredible talent behind the camera. She took thousands of photos, many of which we still have to this day, that give us not only a look into the history of Kamloops itself, but the people who lived here.
Mary Spencer was born October 4th, 1857 in St. Catharines, Ontario, to a family of British immigrants. She had two sisters, Isabel and Elizabeth, whom she was incredibly close with. Spencer and her family were all dedicated Baptists, and her faith would remain deeply important to her for her entire life, and affected more than just her spiritual beliefs. She was also a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. The WCTU, as it was called, was a women's organisation across Canada that believed alcohol abuse was the cause of unemployment, disease, poverty, domestic violence against women and children, as well as many other societal issues. They campaigned for the total prohibition of alcohol, and later advocated for women's suffrage, the right for women to vote, as well as community works like homes for women and children, reading rooms, and prison reform. Though it was her photography that she would be known for, Mary Spencer was not originally trained in photography. She went to school in Ontario and became a teacher. It was unknown where Mary learnt photography, as the field was still mainly dominated by men. Women were often hired as camera operators, darkroom assistants, and print retouchers rather than photographers themselves, but this did not stop Mary Spencer. In 1899, Mary Spencer, alongside her mother and sister Isabel, moved to Kamloops. We don't know why they decided to move out west or why they chose Kamloops, but we do have a few theories. There were no professional photographers in town at the time, leaving the market open for Mary to establish her own studio. Though the lack of photography studios leaving a gap was not the only probable reason the family moved out west. The more likely reason is due to their Baptist faith. A missionary back east had challenged Baptist women to become so-called church planters, moving to new communities and aiding in the creation of new congregations. Kamloops was also home to a new parish under Reverend Alexander MacLeod, with whom the Spencer family would become close friends. It is likely that it was a combination of these factors that they chose Kamloops. What we do know is shortly after her arrival, Mary Spencer opened a photography studio in Kamloops in 1899 and was quickly in high demand. Spencer was known for her scenic photos of Kamloops, her portraits of children, young families, and women. Photography was a growing field as the technology improved, as well as it was becoming much more affordable. Spencer took photos of everyone, seemingly, including photos of Chinese immigrant families. While to modern viewers this may not seem unusual, it is important to remember the extreme prejudice that was placed upon Chinese people in BC and Canada. We don't know her thoughts on the matter, but we do know that whatever her feelings or prejudices, if she had them, did not affect her work. It could be argued that her popularity was due to her being the only business in town, but many people remarked on her skill. She posed people more naturally and gave them props. By doing so, her subject's personality shone through. Mary used a Century View wood camera, an older but still quite popular style of camera, featuring leather bellows which allowed the photographer to move the focus of the lenses, as well as keeping the light out. She would have been able to look through the back of the camera plate to ensure everything was in place before finally adding the film to the camera itself. Once everything was in place and ready, the shutter would be opened, exposing the film inside to light, which would cause a chemical reaction and imprint the photo upon it. From there, the image could be developed. Even with growing photographic techniques, photos could still take 20 to 60 seconds of sitting still to capture the shots. Alongside her portrait work, Mary was well known for her landscape shots, including many of Kamloops itself. The photos provide a window into what Kamloops was like over 100 years ago. But they were also impressive on a technical level. Due to the technology of early cameras, capturing things like clouds in the sky in photos was difficult. Different exposure times would be required to capture them successfully. According to her assistant, Mary captured these shots with a clever technique, using filters of coloured glass in front of her lens to more easily control what lights came into the camera. By doing this, she could show differences in the sky and the landscapes that she was photographing. Advertisements of Mary's studio dotted both the Kamloops Standard and the Sentinel, and in 1903 she opened a new studio, needing a larger area to handle the demand placed upon her shop. Upon the opening of her new shop, the Kamloops Standard reported, quote, "Miss M. Spencer's new studio on Victoria Street is now practically completed, and Kamloops can boast of the largest and most modern photographic establishment in the province. In fact, there are only 2 or 3 in Canada which surpass it in size and convenience of arrangement." The Sentinel newspaper also spoke positively of Mary, heaping pride onto her and her studio, stating, "By strict attention to business and the excellence of her work, Miss Spencer hopes to further merit the patronage of the citizens and those who live in the district." Unfortunately for Mary, her mother Margaret passed only a year after her new store was opened, leaving only Mary and her sister Isabel in Kamloops. The sisters would eventually move forward, with Isabel opening a successful garden centre right next to Mary's studio, selling trees, plants and flowers. It was a rather surprising business, as the town wasn't considered large enough to support a full plant nursery, but Isabel did quite well alongside her sister. Bill Miner and Mary Spencer's past would soon connect, as the police began to narrow in on the gang.
Coming back to the robbery, the CPR crew knew that if there was going to be a chance of catching the robbers, they would have to move quickly. They went back to regain their missing cars and made their way to Kamloops. Constable William Fernie of the BC Provincial Police was one of the first men on the hunt for Miner and his gang. Fernie himself led a fascinating life, leaving his homeland of England as a young man seeking adventure. He had travelled across Canada working as a cowboy before settling in Kamloops in the early 1890s. Like many lawmen of BC, he was a Boer War veteran, joining the provincial police on his return. Fernie knew that if he was going to catch the robbers who already had a head start, he would need trackers. Fernie travelled to the Kamloops land, where he hired 2 trackers he had worked with before, Michel Lecamp and Alec Ignace. Neither man spoke English, but Fernie spoke a little Shuswap as well as the Chinook jargon, which provided enough to communicate his needs. The manhunt was officially on. Alongside Fernie and other members of the BC Provincial Police Force were members of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, or the NWMP. The NWMP, precursor to Canada's RCMP today, the NWMP had been brought in by a request made by the CPR. The board members back east felt that since the failure of the provincial police during the Mission robbery, Miner's first Canadian robbery 2 years previously, it was better to bring in the NWMP. They did not normally have any authority in BC, as they policed the so-called Northwest Territories, the name for the modern-day territories, as well as Alberta, Saskatchewan, and parts of Manitoba. It showed a lot of the CPR's influence that they could make such a request, and that the federal government, not wanting to anger one of the largest businesses in the country, would agree. Miner, Dunn, and Colquhoun had made good time fleeing the robbery. Men matching their descriptions had been seen by various homesteaders and travelers, and the police figured they were heading towards Douglas Lake. Today, less than a 2-hour drive from Kamloops. On foot and without modern roads, it would take days. Fernie was the first to locate the men, a few days before the rest of the posse of NWMP caught up. No photos had been taken of them yet, but based on the descriptions of the train crew, he knew he was looking at the robbers. Outnumbered, Fernie played up his English accent, pretending to be an eccentric traveler. The capture occurred on May 14, 1906. Fernie and the NWMP men had approached the 3 men's temporary camp. Miner, still going by George Edwards, coolly told the posse that they were prospectors who were traveling from the north. When one of the members of the posse told the trio that they matched the description of the robbers, Shorty Dunn sprang for his gun and got into a shootout with the lawmen. He ran into the trees, ducking and dodging while firing. Eventually a shot caught Dunn in the leg, and he surrendered, though one of the NWMP men was also shot. And Dunn apologized for this, but stated that he had asked for it. Minor and Colquhoun knew that they had been caught and did not put up a fight like that. Minor still proclaimed that they were simple prospectors, but one of the posse noticed a small tattoo on Minor's hand, which was a distinguishing characteristic of him. The posse and the captured men would stay the night nearby Kilshannon before traveling back to Kamloops. Word was sent ahead of the men with the new telephone lines that had been installed only a year before. On a cold, wet May morning, the group arrived in Kamloops. The lawmen were shocked to find a large crowd, including a few photographers, had gathered to wait. It is here that the story loops back to Mary Spencer. She had been contracted by the Vancouver Daily Province to take a series of photos of the men in the ensuing trial. She got one of the first shots of the group, with the police on horseback and Dunn and Calhoun wrapped in blankets in the back of a small wagon. Minor is somewhat hidden by the others. Mary was asked by both the Daily Province and the BC Provincial Police Superintendent F.S. Hussey to take photos of the prisoners after the initial questioning. From Mary, we have the most famous photos of Minor and his gang. Requests were sent from across Canada. A telegram from Winnipeg newspaper sent, "Please have photographer who made pictures of robbers rush us copies. As we will pay well. Wire an answer. Please ask photographer which train he will express bandit pictures on." Hussey was quick to limit the reproductions of photos, though, not wanting to create any biases or prejudices before the trial. As well, Spencer was under contract with the newspaper and was not in a place to release them for sale outside. Minor was processed first, as he was the most famous of the three. Accounts remarked that he was surprisingly light-hearted throughout and answered questions coolly. When asked point blank if he was Minor, as he was still claimed to be George Edwards, he stated that he had never heard of the man. The other two men, Shorty and Lewis, were booked shortly after. The initial hearings, pre the trial itself, occurred quickly, beginning May 16th and 17th, only 2 days after the capture. Mary was there and captured the courtroom scene. Frederick Fulton was acting as the Crown prosecutor. The room appears to be full to bursting, with many watching the proceedings with obvious interest. Mary's photos of the men would prove useful to the investigators and allowed them to show the various people they interviewed to create a timeline. Many people remarked upon seeing the men traveling through the area following the robbery. The evidence was mounting against them. The actual trial itself would start May 28th, though the defense tried to argue that jurors in Kamloops would not be fair, as they would have been exposed to the various reporting around the case. This was shot down, though, with the argument stating that they were picked from the whole district and not just the town. The trial would go through 2 rounds of jurors, with the first being unable to come to a judgment. Unfortunately for Minor and the gang, though, the second would not struggle the same way. It was on June 1st, 1906 that all 3 men were found guilty. Minor was sentenced to life, and Dunn and Colquhoun were sentenced to 25 years. The men were sent to the Kamloops prison for the last time. Minor reportedly raised his hat to the crowd, saying, quote, "Well, goodbye, boys." Minor would later escape the BC penitentiary in 1907. Despite the manhunt that followed, he was never caught in Canada. He was seen as a sympathetic person to some, with a popular anecdote stating, "Oh, Bill Minor's not so bad. He only robs the CPR every 2 years. The CPR robs us every day." Minor had cemented himself as a folk hero to many people in BC. The fact that he only robbed the CPR and not regular folk gave him a sort of Wild West Robin Hood snippets. To our knowledge, Minor never returned to Canada. He continued his career as a bandit in the US, but was captured in 1911. He escaped at least 2 more times before dying in prison. As for Mary Spencer, she continued to work in Kamloops after the trial, hiring a photography assistant by the name of Roland Arthur Shoup to help her. It was also around this time that Mary and her sister Belle purchased a small acreage in Summerland, a community around 220 kilometers from Kamloops. They hired a company to plant and maintain an orchard on the land. Mary was 49 years old and Belle was 45. Their businesses in Kamloops were quite successful, with advertisements in nearby Ashcroft papers offering sittings. Some speculate that Mary was gearing up to open a second store there when suddenly in 1909 it was announced that she was selling her studio to her Mrs. L.M. Walker, an experienced photographer from Missouri. The reason why she sold is unknown, but we do know that Belle sold her shop at the same time. It is theorized that for the same reason the Spencer family came to Kamloops is the same reason they left. Kamloops' Baptist ministry had gone through a series of ministers after the retirement of Reverend A.W. MacLeod, and eventually had to close for a time. Faith was incredibly important to the sisters, and the lack of a spiritual body in town could have been why they felt they needed to move. However, they had also been running successful businesses for several years, and they might have simply wanted to retire. They likely would not have wanted for money after the sales of their businesses, as well as the profits from their orchard. While owning and cultivating an orchard was not a common career for single women, Mary and Belle showed they were anything but typical. Despite her amazing life, Mary Spencer is not particularly well known. Photos, especially that of Bill Miner, are, but with little knowing of the women behind the camera. A movie, made in 1981, about Miner called The Grey Fox came out. It was critically acclaimed and widely praised for being incredibly accurate in its dialogue and costuming. But one glaring error remains, and that is about the removal of Mary Spencer. The character Kate Flynn replaces Mary in the story. In the film, she is unmarried, like the real-life Mary Spencer was, as well as a photographer. Unfortunately, that is where the similarities end. In the film, Miner first comes across Flynn hitting golf balls in the woods, listening to opera on her phonograph. As they talk, she remarks that she came out west as she saw the country in transition, speaking of both beauty and despair and feeling the need to capture it all. A romance blossoms between Miner and Flynn, with her almost convincing him to run away with her. Fortunately, it ends with her going out east and Miner taking part in the failed robbery that would lead to him being caught. In real life, Miner and Spencer never met and certainly did not have a budding romance. Spencer was not a particularly public person, and due to this is often assigned a personality by whoever is telling the story. The movie further discounts Mary's role and talent by having an unnamed male character taking the famous booking photos outside the jail. It is obvious the details were changed to sell a better movie, but it does a great disservice to the real Mary Spencer. Her talent and skill in the business and photography are rolled over to supplant her into a doomed romance on the silver screen. This is why I want to speak about Mary Spencer on the show. Growing up in Kamloops, I learned about Bill Miner and his failed robbery, and even saw the famous photos, but I never thought about who took them. In 1938, Mary Spencer would sadly pass. She never pursued a career in photography again, though she did take photos of their new home and surrounding areas that were found after her death. She was buried in Peach Orchard Cemetery in Summerland. Mary Spencer was an extraordinary woman whose dedication and vision brought to light a side of Kamloops that might have been overlooked. Her work not only highlighted the unseen, but also inspired future generations to look deeper, fostering a lasting connection to the past and a richer understanding of Kamloops.